Hi, I'm Melanie Bounds, and I'm going to be talking with you today about social penetration theory. Let's go ahead and switch to the first slide. Social penetration theory was actually developed in 1973 by Erwin Altman and Thomas Taylor. It was originally based on this linear view of relationships. This is the idea that our relationships progress from point A to point B to point C in a very linear fashion. But what Thomas and Taylor realized over time was that our relationships really don't go in a straight line. They're cyclical. They go in a circle. They cycle through. They're very cyclical and dialectical in nature. So they actually updated their theory. And what they came up with is what is often referred to as the onion analogy or the onion theory. This is the idea that people reveal themselves in layers until you finally reach the core, which is that inside part of the person, that really deep, intimate part of that relationship. Now, here's the catch. We're going to actually relate all of this theory, as it relates to relationships and interpersonal communication, into political messages, okay? So hold on for the ride. Let's click to the next slide. Here you see a picture of FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who was elected to office in the fall of 1932 and installed in office in January 1933. This was an incredibly pivotal time in U.S. history, and you have to pardon me because I'm a bit of a history buff. But it truly was, because the stock market and the banking system had not recovered from the events of October 1929. It had continued to spiral downward. And in March, literally just a few weeks after FDR was inaugurated as president for his first term, the banking industry completely collapsed. And on March 6th, after the banks had pretty much been closed for 13 days, and the country was in a complete financial failure and shutdown, FDR declared what he called a bank holiday. Now, I know this doesn't sound like it has a point, but it does, so bear with me. So, at the end of this, FDR said, I've got to fix this. How do I do this? And he worked with Congress. So he declared the bank holiday on March 6, 1933. And on March 12, 1933, FDR presented his first public address to the United States. And this is where social penetration theory comes in. FDR took a different approach because instead of doing what most people did, which was the occasional, wave and smile at the camera that would show up on the newsreels at movie theaters where people could go for free and see the 15 minutes of news every, week or 2 weeks whenever they would update that. FDR said, you know what? Let's try radio. I want to reach the people because if I'm going to make a difference, I've got to garner their support. So how do you garner their support? You go to their homes. Well, you can't go to every home in the country, but you can go into their homes through the radio. And in 1933, it's estimated that 90% of American households had a radio. And this is how people would get music programs, dramatic programs, books would be read, plays that, took place and so forth on the radio. So, and news programs. So FDR decided to address the nation in what was the first of what became a series of 33 fireside chats, they were called. Now, let's go to the next slide. Let's talk about the 4 stages of relationship development, okay? And we're going to see how these relate to FDR and what he did with his fireside chats. The first stage of relationship development, according to social penetration theory, is the orientation of interaction. This is where everything is very, very impersonal in nature. For instance, you and I right now are at that point. This is where we are. You know my name is Melanie Bounds, correct? What else do you know about me? Okay, well, you know my hair color. You can probably look at the video and guess my eye color. You can see the glasses. I wear glasses. But everything right now between us is very, very impersonal. And when FDR was elected in 1933, everything that had been up to that point was very, very impersonal. Yes, there had been the radio address of the inauguration speech, but how many inauguration speeches have we watched? I mean, I'm pushing 50 years old, so I've watched my fair share of inauguration speeches over the years. And they are pretty generic in terms. They're very, very impersonal, and they're designed to sound somewhat inspirational and uplifting. So, But this was the extent of what the American people knew of FDR. So he needed to go to that next level with them in order to get their support. So the second level, or the second stage, according to social penetration theory, is that of exploratory affective exchange. This is where interactions become more relaxed, okay? So when you have a dating relationship, this is where couples go out and this is like maybe the third, fourth, fifth date. At this point in time, they know each other pretty well. They can sit and talk about their day a little bit. They're joking and laughing a little bit more comfortably. It's more comfortable to be in a more intimate setting with them. So for FDR, he had to get to this. How do you do that? Again, like we talked about, there's the option of going to the houses, but how do you go to tens of millions of homes? You can't. So you go in through the radio. So he did just this. With this first radio address, what FDR did was he began his address by breaking down some of these barriers and making things more relaxed and informal. For instance, FDR started his address with the words, "Good evening, friends." That's simple. And it set the tone. The words that he chose to use were very simplistic. He did not go into great detail and say, with act number such and such we're going to do, and give them a bunch of legal ease or political ease that we're so accustomed to. Instead, what he said was, this is where we're at. And I am just as concerned and worried about this as you are. So I want to talk with you tonight so we can help each other. And that was the tone of the address, was to make it very informal, or very, very informal, but much more intimate, and make people feel as if they were a part of this process of bringing the country back into economic recovery. He disclosed some things that were going on in Washington, things that prior to this had very often been kept very private and quiet. So he disclosed these things. He began to tell them what had been going on with Congress and what they were working toward, he and Congress collectively, and what the goal was. He explained what had happened with the banks in easy to understand terms. And he explained how people could help get the banks to open back up and make these changes. So then we have, let's go to the next stage. We have this next stage, which is affective exchange. And this is where the exchanges are more in depth and barriers are being taken down. Okay. How do we get this more in depth through the radio? Well, one of the things that FDR did was continue that informal tone of talking. So when he addressed the people, when he spoke about the American people, he referred to them as you. And he referred to himself as I. So the tone that was set was if he was actually sitting one-on-one in the living room with each individual person and saying, this is what I'm trying to do, and this is what I need you to try to do. So it was this very, very informal thing. He did not say your government wants to do this. He made it very much a collective process. And those barriers begin to fall down. People related to this. People related to this. People began, when people began to write the White House, and FDR really encouraged this. So this takes us to our final stage, stage 4 in relationship development, which is stable exchange. This is a highly intimate relationship. In a romantic relationship, this is the stage where engagements and marriages take place, okay? So FDR had to get there with the people, and he did that through these fireside chats. Excuse me. The fireside chats, as I said, were a total of 33 addresses given over a 10-year period out of his 12 years in office, 10 of the 12 years. There were a total of 33. So as you can see, they estimated there was one probably about every 20 weeks on average. So it's not like he held these on a daily or weekly basis. It's been said they were weekly, but historically they were not. But it was the tone. With each one, FDR kept the same tone. And then he changed it up. About his second or third address, FDR said, you know what, friends? I want to hear from you. I want to know what your concerns are, and how can your government help you? How can I help you? How can we as a government help you? Tell us what you're feeling and what you're going through, or we want to know your successes. And people responded. All of a sudden, they felt like there was this one-on-one collective thing going on. And people responded to this in kind. This is, I think, an amazing example of Altmus and Taylor's stable exchange stage of relationship development. I mean, it was highly intimate at that point in time. People were writing the president letters, and FDR was getting millions of letters in a month. Some of them were poets who were writing poems to him. There were love letters from young girls. There were little boys who wanted to grow up to be just like him and be president. But there were adult men and women who were writing to him and saying, this is where we're at. We don't have a home. We've lost our home. Or we don't have any food to eat. Or, this is what's happening. Our children are ill. There's no money for medicine. There's no doctors. What do we do? And FDR worked with Congress to try to help solve these situations. This is how the New Deal and some of these other things, Social Security, all of this came into being, our modern welfare system. Because FDR heard what they were saying and he responded by taking action and would address things. I'm here when he would do another fireside chat, he would say, since the last time we talked, friends, I've heard from you that you have these problems. And he would list specific problems that he had been written about. And he would say, and this is what we're doing. And he would make things on such terms that people got it. And people who, many of them, really didn't have much in the way of education, but they got it and they were able to understand. And this is what made social penetration theory, or made these fireside chats, such an amazing thing. So he was able to reach that highest level, that stable exchange, that really high level of intimacy with individuals. Fireside chats, if you click to your next slide, actually increased White House mail 10 times over what it had been previously. And I just think that's amazing. Today, in closing, there have been many presidents who have since tried to emulate what FDR had done. The first of which, honestly, was Ronald Reagan. And in 1982, I believe it was, Ronald Reagan, with some urging, actually held his first of what would become weekly radio addresses, with the intent of hopefully having the same imprint on Americans that FDR had felt. But it wasn't that way. What had changed was that political messages have changed since then. The way the press handles things has changed since then. FDR changed a lot of things. He used stable exchange theory to his advantage to be able to reach out to the American people and reach them in a way that no other president before him had done, and no other president since him has been able to do. And that actually has to deal with the conflict issue of social penetration theory, which is honestly a paper in and of itself. But with that, I want to thank you very much for watching my presentation. I'm sorry it is a little bit long-winded, but I wanted to make sure I got in the highlights of everything. So I hope you enjoyed it. Like I said, next time you're going out on a date or you're looking at your spouse or something like that, maybe think about these things and think about how it is you got to where you are in your relationship and all the different stages that you went through. And I think you'll find it's pretty fascinating and it does add up. Thank you all very much. Have a blessed rest of the semester.